Kevin Hunt, who is doing a fabulous job in bringing all the technology and all the folks together on this. So thank you, Kevin. Welcome everyone to the second event of the Summit Series. Today's topic is safety validation within the world of automated vehicles. I'm Stan Caldwell with Carnegie Mellon University's Traffic 21 Institute, and I'll be moderating today's event. I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to come out today and listen to our great lineup of speakers. This webinar will be recorded to be posted on the Pennsylvania AV Summit website. Before we begin, please ensure that your microphone is muted throughout the entire webinar to reduce background noise. Please feel free to utilize the chat function at any time to ask questions. So again, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Our chat moderator will then be able to forward any questions to me at the appropriate time that we can provide to the panelists. Before we begin, we would like to thank SAE for sponsoring the entire Summit Series webinar events. A little background on the Summit Series. It's a series of virtual events created in the wake of the cancellation of the 2020 PA Automated Vehicle Summit Conference. This event is the second in the series of webinars that will lead up to the 2021 Virtual Summit in October later this year. There will be approximately one event per month with a focus on a specific topic that relates to automated vehicles. We have a lot of great topics and speakers lined up for our webinars, and we hope to see you at future events. Also on this, I'm sorry, I just wanted to mention too, on this slide here, you'll see all of the partners that have contributed to this event and to the past summits, and we appreciate all of their support.
Okay, we're going to open a poll. Oh, sorry, Stan.
No, go ahead. Kevin's going to put up a poll, and this will be a poll asking about your employment sector and who you're representing. This poll will help both the speakers and the audience know what groups are represented on today's call. We'll leave the poll up for a minute or two as we are starting, whenever the poll is up, we will share results. Our first presentation is from Amy Chu, Director of SAE's Industry Technologies Automated Vehicle Safety Consortium. There are full bios of all the speakers on the PA AV Summit website, and that website is paavsummit.org. Amy, we are very happy to have you present today. Are you able to share your screen?
Thank you, Stan. Not yet. I don't have the sharing capabilities.
Yeah,
so
finishing up the poll.
over.
We're finishing up the poll, then I'll pass it off to you, Amy.
Okay, sounds good. I'll be here. Okay, looks like I'm able to share. Let me get through these logistical. And one more thing. Oh. There we go. Look good?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. So thanks for the introduction, Stan. I get to kick things off here and warm everybody up. I'm Amy Chu. I am representing the Automated Vehicle Safety Consortium, which is a program of SAE ITC. So you heard today that SAE International is a big sponsor of this event. SAE ITC is actually a division within SAE International, whereas the typical, what you're used to with SAE International is individuals coming together to write voluntary technical standards. SAE ITC, we bring together groups of companies that actually represent their own company and talk about various technical issues. So in our case, we're focused on automated vehicle safety. Our group of members, I'll just tell you, well, I'll tell you a little bit about what we're going to do. We're going to talk about who ABSC is, how we work, what are our work themes. I'll go into a little bit of detail about our published best practices that we've done so far, and then give you an insight as to what we're doing going forward. So I'm showing on the screen right now our ABSC member teams. Basically, we have a number of companies who are involved in the development, the integration, and fleet operation of automated driving systems. And so this is an invitation-only consortium that focuses on getting best practices together for our emerging industry. So our mission, shown here on the screen, is to quickly establish safety principles and common terminology and best practices leading to standards. And our whole point of doing this is to get that collaboration in place so that we can engender public confidence. We know that level 4 and level 5 vehicles are going to be out there one day, and we want to make sure that not only are we collaborating with each other, but we're also sharing what types of information we're coming together on with the public to make sure that they understand what's going on. So as you know, there's a lot of research projects, different committees, tons of things going on in this space that we'll hear more about from my fellow panelists. What the ABSC aims to do is take all of this in and then talk through some of these different projects that are going on, different works in progress, other voluntary technical standards with the expert consideration. And we aim towards 100% consensus on certain best practices. And you think about that for a second and think about the big companies that we have on our membership, that's difficult to do. We're actually coming through and saying, these are the things that we can agree on right now. Or in some cases, we may say these are the things that we can't agree on right now, and here's why. But the idea is that we're a small group that can come to that consensus faster than what would happen in the normal technical standards development. So what we're trying to do is get a kickstart to that. And then being affiliated with SAE International, we're able to then take those best practices and walk them into the standards committees there. We also get involved with other global technical standards organization to basically take in and say, hey, here's what the different industry groups have agreed upon, and then throw it over to the larger group of subject matter experts, hopefully accelerating their process. So the whole point is to establish the principles quickly and get them into standards so that we can get this moving in the level 4, level 5 group and ultimately have the safest vehicles possible. So just a reminder, when we say level 4 and level 5, the ABSC is primarily focused on these two levels. And this is an infographic that is included in the SAE J3016. When we talk about level 4 and level 5 vehicles, these are the ones that do not require a human to take over the driving task. So they either are going to have no controls like a steering wheel or brakes, or they might have those controls and only operate in a certain environment or ODD. So this is specifically what we're talking about in the future, and not looking towards any of the previous levels or ADAS. We're primarily focused on level 4 and level 5. So I just wanted to clarify that. So how do we work? We are technology neutral. So again, thinking in terms of these companies coming together and talking about safety best practices, we're really working on the what and leaving the how for each organization to determine. So what this means is that we'll get together and we decide and consent upon what is important for each organization to determine. And then, you know, the secret sauce or any of the technical discussions really happen within those companies. We don't talk about that within our group. The second thing is that we're really aiming to be complementary and leverage and reference the good work of others. So we're not looking to come up with brand new things, but instead we're looking to bring all those things together. and complement that work, really trying to avoid that redundancy. We have a common interest, sharing current practices and describing those challenges. So in the case where we can't come to consensus on a certain topic, we'll describe why. Why is it difficult at a certain point in time to come to consensus? And again, as I mentioned before, we're working to accelerate those standards. So taking what we've consented on and decided as far as best practices, walking it into these SAE standards committees, other global standards committees, and also making our best practices available to the public. So again, talking about how we build public trust. We are speaking at events like this to let everybody know what we're doing. We think that's important. And then also making our best practices free and accessible to whoever wants to download them. So we like to show this infographic here that it really is like a puzzle. It's not a straight line from point A to point B. We know that there's a ton of things going on in the industry. There's lots of different groups involved in this. Everybody's excited about getting automated vehicles on the road, but know that there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that they're safe. So the three work themes that we're primarily focused on are testing, interaction, and data. And depending on what other works are going on in industry, we try to zero in on where are those gaps, where are there areas that the industry leaders need to be talking about, and really just bring forth that type of collaboration and discussion. So the ABSC was actually created in April of 2019. So we're coming up on our 2-year anniversary here. And over the course of that time, we've been able to release a number of best practices, which I'll go through a little more detail on each one here shortly. But also wanted to point out that we've got, because they're freely available online, we keep track of which ones are getting downloaded and how often and where the interest is coming from. And so this is global. We're interested not only in what's going on in one part of the world, but all over the world. And so we're keeping track of that. So just to highlight some of our best practices that are already out there. The first one was the in-vehicle fallback test driver. There's really important best practices for selecting, training, and oversight procedures for automated vehicles. These are things that we knew were the most important to get out there as soon as possible. So this best practice really addresses those qualifications and what type of training it should be available and recommended by the industry members. Talking a common language is really important. So describing the operational design domain, making sure that we have a language that we can talk to each other. It's really difficult to try and solve a problem when everybody's calling something different. So definitely the language is kind of a key in what you'll see in a lot of our best practices, but this one in particular was, how do you describe what is your operational design domain? And so it also lists a list of potential variables with definitions that manufacturers and developers can use in describing their ODD. The passenger initiated trip interruption for emergencies. So this is something that really involves the user. When you think about today, when you're driving in a vehicle, you have the steering wheel, you have the brakes, you can control your own vehicle. But if you were riding in a vehicle that was being controlled for you, that sense of control is still something that could be, make you uncomfortable if you don't have that. So basically, we came together and talked about what are the things in the vehicle that are needed, and you could think of this one as kind of like the emergency stop in an elevator or the emergency call button. That's typically what this is, and basically to give the passengers some sort of agency where they have control. If something comes up or they perceive an emergency, they can take action. And again, this is a really good example of one where not necessarily telling each manufacturer how to do these things, but just saying that it's important that they have this capability. The data collection for automated driving system dedicated vehicles. This is to support event analysis and to promote, what type of information would be helpful for lessons learned. So as we know, the way that automated vehicles are tested and rolled out, there is lots of lessons learned along the way, and there's certain data points that are really important to keep track of. And so this is addressing what those data points should be. And so this actually complements the current motor vehicle data collection standards, including SAE 1698 and 3197. And this is a really good example of one that we've taken over to those committees and said, hey, you know, here's what we came up with. What do you all think about this? And so that's actually going on right now. And then our last one that we came out with in December of last year was first responder interactions with fleet managed ADS-DV. So this is really meant for ADS developers and manufacturers to think in terms of what first responders will need a vehicle to do. So again, we're going from a place where, you know, as a driver, you can interact with a first responder, or you know, there's different situations that when you don't have a driver need to be considered. And so this was actually based on CAMP research that the Crash Avoidance Metrics Partnership, which basically highlighted what are the different types of interactions that will happen. And then what we did was we talked about each one of those and tried to come up with a practicable way for manufacturers and developers to meet those needs. And so with this one, we've also done a lot of outreach with first responder communities. We're continuing that outreach, and pretty much in all of our best practices, we're looking to do that same type of outreach to introduce our best practices and get feedback, and especially from the public. So moving forward, we have our focus and different categories. And so this breaks it down a little further and just a forward-looking statement about what are we going to do next. And so without revealing all the different topics, I'll just say that we would continue the expansion of our safety topics and build upon the released best practice materials that have been put out there. We'll make further engagement with global voluntary technical standards groups. So we'll continue that pipeline through. And then obviously it's really important for us to harmonize on baseline terminology, principles, and best practices as ADS technology evolves. So can't stress enough the importance of that common language and how we talk to each other, but also how we talk in public forums for those who are not necessarily in the technical community or in the developer community, but how can we ensure that confidence with the public? So in our presentation, I have all of our contact information, and our website is up here as well. I encourage you, if you're interested in any of these topics, please do go to the website. You can download any of our best practices for free. So please do that and reach out to us anytime. We're really looking for more public engagement. We'll be doing more engagements like this. And thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Amy. You're right on time. Perfect.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Our next presenter is Nat Buse, and Nat is Aurora's head of safety. Nat, are you able to bring up your screen?
I think so. Can you see it?
Yes, and you're in full presentation mode, so it looks good.
Perfect, perfect. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks, Stan, for the introduction, and happy to be here to talk about Aurora's approach to safety validation. So as Stan mentioned, my name is Nat Buse, and I am head of safety at Aurora. My team focuses a lot on both the engineering aspects of what we're doing, but also on kind of what the organization is doing itself, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So for people who don't know who we are, let me just give you kind of a quick overview. So Aurora exists really to bring self-driving technology safely, quickly, and broadly through the Aurora driver. A lot of people have mistakenly think that we only focus on trucks, but we actually do trucks and cars. And part of what we're doing right now is really focus on learning as much as we can in the offline world and delivering those aspects both in offline testing, but also as we test more broadly on public roads. And so one of the things I thought I'd talk about today and relate is this whole concept of safety assurance. and really what that means both from a developer like ourselves, I think, but also what it means in the context of some of the work that Amy just went through. And one of my fellow panelists will go through some work with some other standards. And I'll talk about how we're kind of thinking about both of those aspects. For me, it's always very interesting to kind of take a step back and answer the question as to why are we talking about safety validation in the first place? I think in my mind, part of it is all of us who work on this technology really understand its potential. You know, this potential to really reduce the toll of traffic fatalities that happen on our nation's highways, the countless injuries that happen at, you know, in some of these, and some of those have lifetime impairments that take tons and tons of money to fix. But also, this technology is being developed and tested kind of in the eyes of the consumer, and they see about it every day. They read about it in the paper. And that's kind of unique from, let's say, other vehicle safety technologies that have come to market. You know, when you think about airbags, it wasn't like we were subjecting the public to those kind of tests, right? In fact, there, the answer was we actually had to convince consumers that the airbags were safe. So there was a whole gamut of videos and things like that that were produced to explain to consumers the benefits of airbags. Here, it's more we have to convince not only ourselves, but the consumers that we've all done our homework and developed this technology in a safe way. And so kind of a few simple bullets to talk about when we think about safety validation. You know, first of all, this is a technology that is still very much in its infancy. So when you have new technologies coming out in their infancy, a lot of work goes on somewhat behind the scenes with industry players getting together and trying to share knowledge and best practices on safety. So Amy just went through the ones that are coming out from Absc. And what I'm showing here is, at least from my perspective, this is just a sampling of the full gamut of stuff that my team looks at. So we look at industry standards, of course. And I mentioned that this technology, it's in its youth. Well, one of the things that we're doing is actually looking across industries. So not just saying, you know, kind of not invented here syndrome, but actually looking in other safety critical industries like medical, like nuclear, to really understand how we can build on those experiences from those industries and apply them directly to self-driving. One of the other things that's informative is regulations. And of course, people generally would say, well, there's very few regulations, you know, currently right now that say govern the operations or the, and when I talk about operations, I'm really talking about the engineering aspects of self-driving. But there's a lot of development going on around the world. And so part of what my team is doing is looking at all of those different activities and learning from them and applying them and just determining, do they really work for what we're doing? And if not, why not? And if they do, how do we integrate them into the engineering of our vehicle? Then there's sort of standard engineering methods. A lot of things like system safety, I think, get thrown into this bucket. But again, there's no reason to sort of reinvent the wheel when there's a lot of things that we can learn and leverage from things that have come before us. And then this other bucket, I'm going to lump together guidance, best practices, and safety frameworks. Because to me, those all kind of fit in the very common bucket of what generally people would call due care. So are you kind of looking out beyond what you're actually required to do and trying to understand how you can make yourself even better? Sort of this notion that safety is always continuing improving. You don't go to a destination on safety and check the box and say, I'm done. You're continually working on safety, and both on the engineering side and also on the organizational side. But I just said a bunch of words, and if you talk to anybody over dinner who's not in the space, you know, they really actually only ask 2 or 3 basic questions, like how safe is safe enough sometimes? Is it safe for me when I'm next to this thing? And am I safe when I'm in it? And so part of what we have to do as an industry in forums like this as well is to help to explain to consumers what we're actually talking about when we talk about something as heavy as safety validation. So one of the things that's interesting when you look across the landscape of what I just went through is, we'll say the alphabet soup of standards. And this is not all of them, by the way. There's many, many more we could have put on this slide. But there's a couple points I wanted to make with this. One is this notion that there's a single standard that a company should follow, and that's the answer. We think is actually not the way to look at this. If you look at the problem of self-driving and how you validate it, you have to do all of these different, we'll call it circles, and some of them overlap and some of them don't. So simulation probably should be a key piece of your validation strategy. On the complete other side of the spectrum, something that folks sometimes don't talk about too much is cybersecurity. How does that fit into your validation approach? And so what we've done is we've sort of gone through and grouped these into areas so that we can, when we're talking through how we're going to validate our system, we kind of have this mental model of all the things that we want to make sure are in consideration. And so for us, one of the techniques we're using is something called a safety case. And you'll hear from Jackie, who will go through, I assume in some detail about what is a safety case and how to use it. But the point I wanted to make here is that the safety case isn't a checklist. It isn't like some big filing cabinet where you put a bunch of stuff. It's actually a living thing that you engineer both in your organization, the way we're thinking about it, but also into your product. And really the simplest way to explain it is if you were trying to make a claim of whatever you want to say, that you actually have the same structure underneath to support that claim. And these things are complicated. I think one thing to take away, and I'm sure you'll see it in Jackie's presentation, is safety cases are not simple. And in some ways, there are no similar paths to the same safety case. They're really dependent on the company's specific application, and they're really specific on your particular environment that you're trying to use it for. The other thing I'll make a point about the safety case and the way we're thinking about it is we believe that the organizational aspects of how you think about safety should also be part of your safety case. So it's not just about, did I engineer the product correctly? It's actually also, how is my organization performing on the safety front? How is our safety culture? Does the management know what its risk culture is? Does it understand where there are problems or challenges, and are they addressing those factors? And so some concepts to share with everyone is, and kind of how we're thinking about it, are sort of these broad statements, purposely broad, to think through what are all the things that we think through on the safety team as we continue to develop our safety case. So of course, the vehicle has to operate safe under normal conditions. That should be a thing that you work towards, that you engineer for. One would also expect it to be safe when something goes wrong, right? You should think about that. You should think about what goes into making that statement true. One thing we're also thinking through is, how do anomalies affect the safe operation of that vehicle? These are all important concepts that when we think through how we're developing our safety case, the argument structure, and the claims that would go against it, these are sort of some of the high level things that we're thinking through when we're building that framework. So the point of this slide is just to explain maybe in a little bit greater detail that any one safety case could have a number of claims. And when you start breaking that down to the evidence level, it can be thousands, right? You could have evidence across the organization that you're trying to manage, understand, digest, and ensure that it actually rolls up to meet your top level safety claim. And so one of the things that we're thinking through, even from our own safety team perspective internally, is actually how do we manage this, right? That is something that is very, very important from thinking through how you put all these pieces together. So what is a completed safety case? And I kind of mentioned this earlier. So it is a structured argument. We believe that it relies on a lot of different inputs, not just one single standard to say you're done. We believe it has to be a defensible argument. right? You have to be able to look at it and we'll call it beat it up a bit to make sure that it actually stays sound. One of the things I mentioned is this notion of the organization. We sort of use the term safety management system as a very broad term, but really we're talking about 4 key pillars. One is safety policy, let's say. One is safety assurance. One is safety culture. And wrapped up in all of that, right, is how you talk about it and promote it. So, you know, for us, that is a key enabler for our safety case. And the other thing to kind of mention, because it's worth talking about, is we don't believe it's a proper tool, let's say, for regulations. When you look at what it is so massive in some ways, but also very complicated. And as I mentioned before, no 2 safety cases are going to be the same, even for a same company that might have different products. And so typically regulations are sort of a one size fits all. And this is one that doesn't necessarily yield itself to that sort of framework. I think one thing maybe to pick on a little bit, because I mentioned it a couple of times, is the notion of a checklist. I hear sometimes in the industry, a lot of people refer to the safety case as a filing cabinet where you put some files in and you kind of go through the file cabinet and say that you're done. For us, we think that doesn't necessarily live up to the spirit of what a safety case is supposed to be. A safety case should be living and breathing, so to speak. Not that you're changing the claims or the framework all that much, but sort of what makes it valuable is the continual learning that you're putting into it. And so if you're always thinking through your safety and always improving, then obviously your safety case also has to change with that. And that's also another reason why it doesn't necessarily lend itself very well to a regulatory framework. So with that, I'll stop and look forward to hearing questions.
All right, thank you very much, Nat. That gives us a lot better perspective on what the safety cases are and how they're developed. I appreciate that. Our next presenter is Maureen Brown. Maureen is the Innovation Underwriting Unit Leader at Munich Reinsurance America. Maureen, are you able to share your screen?
Can you see it or not?
Not yet. I see
Okay.
you.
You see me. Okay, so let me go back. Share. And sorry.
Yeah, your screen is
Yeah,
up.
I can see. Yep. So let me share the right thing here. My apologies. Do that. Of course, I had this. Let me stop sharing for a second. Get back to here and let me share.
Take your time. Fortunately, Nat was 1 minute under, so Nat gets the prize of efficiency.
That's typically not the case, so kudos.
All right, can you see this now or not?
No, I see you right now.
Okay, still, all right. Don't know why it's not coming up right. Oh, there it is. Okay, I found it. Okay, good. I'll start from the beginning and we are good to go.
Okay,
Good.
yeah, yes, you're in slide mode now. Thank you.
Good. Okay, terrific. So good afternoon, everybody, and I'm thrilled to be part of this panel today. I was delighted to be invited, and people wonder why an insurance company is involved in a conversation like this. And I think it's important to realize that we're going to provide a lot of support in order for you to continue developing and moving to commercialization, because we're going to be the ones that are going to cover the risks, not just from an automobile perspective, but also from a general liability perspective as more of the development goes commercial and you start to have products exposure in addition to auto exposure. I wanted to briefly talk about what I do. And while I work for the largest reinsurance company in the world, I actually run a primary insurance unit that's only focused on new and emerging exposures. So if you are a traditional company in any way, shape, or form, you don't come to my unit. I only work with things like ride hailing, peer-to-peer car sharing, and subscription services, and disruptive forms of mobility, which also includes autonomous vehicles. So mine is the only unit on a primary basis here in the US that writes coverage for autonomous vehicles for Munich Re. We do have some global units that are involved, but here in the US, it's strictly my unit. We're also a member of PAVE, and we felt it was important to join that so that we could also begin to educate consumers, other interest groups outside of the automotive industry that need to be comfortable with this technology and feel a comfort level in not only accepting it, but also utilizing it in one way, shape, or form. With that, the first thing I'm going to talk about, which just drives us crazy, and there was one question that was presented earlier, which I'll address later. But for us, there's no standards in regulation, regardless of whether it's on a federal or state level. So you heard Nat, and also Amy talk about some of the standards that are in play, and I'm sure you'll hear the same thing with the speaker from EdgeCase talking as well with respect to the standards that are being utilized to develop voluntary standards. But even on a state level, we have to deal with multiple regulations. The first regulation, whenever you're involved with an automobile, of course, is the financial responsibility. What does it take to get the vehicle insured when you register it? And then some states have implemented vehicle requirements around autonomous driving. And so, for example, states like California, when you're getting a permit, you have to produce evidence that you have at least $5 million in coverage, and it can also be posted via a bond, or that you present a certificate of insurance for that limit. Other states have various limits, some have none. And then the other thing on top of that is if you're dealing with specific industries inside of autonomous vehicle development, for example, trucking, or what are known as robotaxis, you have to deal with a third set of regulations, either on the federal level, if they have a Department of Transportation carrier number for hauling goods across the country in order to test and also finance themselves in some respects, or if you want to operate as a livery service in an autonomous mode, you have to comply with what are known as the Public Utility Commission requirements in specific states. So for us, when we're dealing with clients, it's important that we understand what set of regulations applies in what instance and be able to give them, at the minimum, the coverage that they're requesting, but also in some cases, working with their broker, hopefully to provide the coverage that will protect them in the event of a loss or a crash. I wanted to point out some stats which are absolutely key for us and why we are so focused on moving this technology along and working with the developers and with the companies that produce the component parts, and even working in some cases with the OEMs to begin to develop, and put on the road the vehicles that will start to prevent, number one, crashes, reduce drastically the number of fatalities, and also reduce the number of injuries. Because again, if you have vehicles that are not being operated by humans, all of these numbers will go down. Some numbers will still exist, such as the cost in crashes, but it shouldn't be in the billions of dollars like it is today. Fatalities should go down drastically, because if you see the footnote at the top or the note at the top of the slide, 90% of vehicle accidents are attributed to human error, whether it be distracted driving, drunk driving, or even lack of use of a seatbelt. We find in one of our pilots that many of the last mile delivery vans will sometimes obscure their inward facing cameras to hide the fact that they're actually clicking their seatbelt behind them and not wearing it when they're driving. So we're constantly having to deal with some of the clients to ensure that the cameras are not obscured. And they do it with things like Vaseline. It's a very interesting phenomenon. So we are supporting the development in this industry because we realize that moving forward, it's going to save a lot of lives and reduce the amount of money that is spent on crashes and also injuries. Where we see shifts from traditional to new coverages and premiums, we're going to be moving, and it's going to take a while. Right now, our current system should be more than sufficient to handle what we're seeing with accidents and current judgments and settlements and claims suits being presented in the courts. But we'll be moving from the protection from the driver, the individual driver that needs to be insured because of the negligent operation, and it'll become more of the system. The system will become the operator, so to speak. And then at that point, it should become more of a products liability suit and less of an automobile suit, because generally speaking, then the accident crash would have occurred because of some defect in the product itself. But that will take time. And in the meantime, our system, as I said, should be more than sufficient to handle the claims and judgments. Where we'll see some changes in coverage, for example, in comprehensive and collision, those are what are known as the physical damage coverages. We'll have to start including coverage for mechanical breakdown, because a vehicle that has all of this ADAS equipment in it is going to be likely to suffer a mechanical breakdown loss that we don't cover today. For collisions, there should be less of a need for collision in the future with the vehicles that are being equipped with all of the ADAS equipment, not only from a traditional side, but also from an automated driver system side. And so we'll start to see a reduction in the production in the cost for collisions. But at the same time, because there's so many more sensors and potentially LiDAR built into the vehicle itself, the cost of an accident will go up, while there should be a reduction in the number of accidents, because it will be more expensive, for example, to repair or replace, because you may not even be able to repair, a quarter panel that has sensors in it. And for example, a windshield that also has sensors. Generally speaking, you can't just replace the windshield. You have to calibrate the cameras that are built in or attached to the windshield. So you're going to see an increase in some of the costs to repair, replace, but you'll see the reduction from the numbers. For the other coverages, such as MedPay, underinsured, motorists, personal injury protection, those should eventually all go away for the most part, because the liability laws will change. You won't be required necessarily to have underinsured and insured coverage at a state level, but it will take time for the states to realize these coverages should no longer be necessary. Where we're going to see new exposures, and we're already seeing it today, as some of the development companies are getting ready to either sell their developed software hardware to third parties, or they're putting vehicles on the road with their own products inside the vehicles. We will see an expanded demand for products liability for autonomous vehicle parts, components, and the vehicles themselves. And this is for, for companies like Easy Mile and Navia. The other exposure is coming. It's not brand new, but it will definitely increase. The cyber exposure resulting from all the connected parts, the data points in these vehicles, where you can have networking issues, communication issues, hacking, ransom. So right now, the policies don't address any cyber. For example, auto doesn't address cyber at all. So it's covering what is known as silent cyber, but that will have to be addressed in the future, and there'll have to be actually coverage purchased to cover the cyber exposure from all the component parts of the various networks, because it could come from an entertainment network, it could come from the operating system of the OEM, it could come from the connection where you have a mechanic, hooking up to the vehicle to determine if there's damage or if there's a need for service. You'll see a shift of the premiums. Loss frequency and severity will go down from a BI perspective, bodily injury perspective, but the severity of a loss could increase from a physical damage because, as I said before, the cost of the repair replacement is going to be significantly higher as these cars become more specialized with additional devices, sensors, cameras, LiDAR built into them. Commercial auto and products liability will become a larger percentage of the market. Personal auto will reduce. There'll be an overall mix and a move away from traditional owned policies. Now, we started to see that somewhat over the past couple of years, but interestingly enough, the pandemic had a market shift in individual car ownership, and it actually went up in 2020, both from a new car perspective and also from a used car perspective. What wound up happening, particularly in the Gen X and the Gen Y generations, where it wasn't as important for them to own vehicles, because of the feeling of isolation and the inability to get around during the pandemic, you saw a market increase in individual vehicle ownership. So we'll have to watch that again over the next couple of years and see if it smooths itself out and starts to move back to where there was less of a need for individual ownership. And then, of course, we will continue to see a geographic and demographic mobility consumption. What we're starting to see in many industries is a way for them to utilize their fleets more, particularly with industries such as car dealerships. They have many vehicles sitting on a lot. How do they utilize those vehicles more frequently than they do today? And that will also have an impact on future mobility trends and also behaviors. So I put a slide in here, most of you are engineers, so you're well aware of this, but these are all the concerns we have from, the cyber perspective and the data and how it can come into and go from a vehicle, and what it means, with points of potential entry that can impact a system in a vehicle. We're also going to see a shift in not only from liability, but also new stakeholders that are going to be part of this process. Without automation, we currently have the driver, the owner, and the car manufacturer. Those are generally the three that are going to get involved with suits, particularly if there's a product failure today. And the current tort liability, it's based on common law in our country, negligence if it's a statutory no-fault law, or strict liability in some cases from the product's liability. But when you go to full automation, levels 4 and 5, you begin to see a switch. And now you have, all the component manufacturers of a vehicle potentially involved in a suit. In addition, you might have municipalities having to accept some of the liability because of the vehicle to infrastructure or lack of vehicle to infrastructure communication. Also with telecom companies, and mapping companies, you might to see some increased exposure from their companies as well. And then with the future tort liability, certainly products liability is going to be at the forefront. There may or may not be a need for no fault. We'll have to see how that plays out. Health insurance certainly is going to change. And there is a potential for arbitration courts to get more heavily involved, particularly when there is a suit involving a car manufacturer and one or more of its component part manufacturers. And there might be a way to arbitrate those losses rather than have to play them out in a court of law, which of course is always much more expensive. So for us, the new state, new insurance models, operational complexity, and again, the shift of premium. And why do we do this as an insurance company? Because we believe in it. And what are some of the things that we're doing today to help us learn? Because, for me and my staff, I have one engineer on my staff, and we will have more in the future, but most of us are true insurance people. So for us, it's trying to figure out how do we underwrite and price these new risks with the tools that we have today. And we're working with outside vendors right now to help us assess, the operational design domain, the safety case documentation, things that Nat talked about earlier, as well as Amy. So we're working with other companies to help us build new tools or refine the tools that they have today to allow us a broader breadth of knowledge and understanding of what our new clients are bringing into the mix with respect to exposure so that we can adequately price them. Lastly, again, for us in the insurance world, we're always worried about frequency versus severity. And on the slide that I presented with the numbers from the crashes, one of the things that happened in 2020 was while frequency went down because of COVID, severity went up. We had more deaths in 2020 than we had in 2019. And part of the assumption as to why that occurred is because while there were less vehicles on the road, people drove more dangerously than if there had been more vehicles on the road. So we saw an increase in 2020 in the number of fatalities, which is just mind-boggling, but that's what actually occurred. So we expect to continue to see a lower frequency as more development of autonomous vehicles, brings a greater number onto the roads. Now, we also know that while you have humans and some autonomous vehicles on the road, those numbers may alter a little bit because humans behave strangely when confronted with an autonomous vehicle in the mix. And you can go on YouTube to see a number of reactions of motorists when they see a vehicle that has no operator, right? Severity, of course, the liability, we expect to go down dramatically from a severity standpoint, and the physical damage will go up because of the increased costs. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maureen. To your earlier point, where it is very refreshing to have the perspective of the insurance industry, especially to this detail, and the data that you have is really insightful that we're not traditionally getting from traffic engineering. And so really appreciate your presentation. Our final presenter is Jackie Erickson, and Jackie is Senior Director of Communications for EdgeCase. And Jackie, while you're bringing up your slides, I just want to remind everyone that you can put questions in the chat or in the Q&A. They're being monitored, and I already saw that Amy already answered one of the questions in the Q&A, so please take advantage of that, and we'll review them for the Q&A session afterwards. All right, Jackie, your presentation looks good. Go ahead.
All right, great. Well, first off, I want to thank PennDOT for holding the summit even in virtually. And I can say that this is my 4th Pennsylvania Automated Vehicle Summit. Started in State College, went to Pittsburgh, out to the Poconos, and now I'm here in my house doing the Automated Vehicle Summit. But I'm very glad that PennDOT was able to continue this during this time. So my talk is going to be on safety validation via safety case approach, but I must say Nat did a fantastic job of prepping this. So kudos to Nat. All right. See if my deck wants to move. There we go. Okay. So here are a few just topics I'll cover. Overview of a safety case. Standards that are utilizing a safety case approach, UL 4600 and UL 4600-2. I'll talk a little bit about how AV companies are utilizing and insurance companies utilizing safety cases. But again, I think Nat covered a good chunk of that for me. So he validates my talk already. And then I will also share a testimonial for safety cases, and then share a few resources that we have at Edge Case Research. Okay. So at Edge Case, first off, for those that are not familiar with us, we're a Pittsburgh-based company. We have also expanded over the last year to Munich, Germany. We have a great presence over in European markets. So we've expanded to support the efforts that we're working on with OEMs and Tier 1s over in Europe today. We're very fortunate that our experts have had decades of experience in automobile and autonomous system safety. At Edge Case, we provide our services to OEMs and Tier 1s and full stacks, insurance companies, standards bodies, you name it. And we also have tools that help validate safety on the road as well. And we truly do believe that autonomous vehicles driving on our roadways should be built safely from the ground up. And there is no better time than right now to start implementing good engineering rigor and good safety process. It's a time to do this is now, as we're in these early phases. And so at Edge Case, again, as I mentioned, we do play a unique role. We're kind of in the center of the industry, again, with the OEMs, the Tier 1s, full stack insurance standards, and we work with companies all over the world. And the common theme is that companies are looking to achieve acceptable safety. And how do we do that? We help them get there with safety cases. And so at Edge Case, we focus on delivering live safety cases backed by evidence to help our customers define, measure, manage, and communicate safety of autonomous vehicles in the real world. And I'm going to focus a moment here on the word live, because Nat acknowledged it as well. This is just not a document. This is a living, breathing process, because as this technology is evolving, you're going to get constant field feedback on what are the things, what are the unknowns that you found in the field that need to be updated into your safety case. So I know that Nat had already kind of given some high-level aspects of the safety case. I'm going to do a little bit as well, but I'm actually going to kind of shift and kind of go in a little bit of a slightly different direction, and take a moment here, because over the last year, many of us have been multitasking, whether you've been working and homeschooling and parenting. And over the last year, I've been homeschooling my 2 children, one in 3rd grade and 6th grade. And they just finally went back to school 2 weeks ago. But over the last year, my 3rd grader has been sitting in all of my meetings, listening to all of my talks. And this is what I get. I get little printouts from him on a daily basis. And last week, he did this for me. What is a safety case? So here's the actual thing. I'm not making it up. And how does it help people? He should have been focusing on language arts, because clearly there is a grammar error. So, but this is a question that people say, what is a safety case? And truly, how does it help? So I'm here to answer this. So a safety case is a framework to communicate safety to stakeholders. From a more technical standpoint, and even Nat acknowledged very similar definition, a safety case is a structured argument supported by evidence justifying system is acceptably safe for its intended use. So at a very high level, the safety case will tell you, what do you mean by safe? Why do you believe that you're safe? And I think some of the most important things is really show me the evidence here. But we focus again on a way for a safety case to be that framework from a communication standpoint. We feel that that's very important as we start talking more about building trust and transparency in the public sector. So I'm going to go into just a few components. Again, a little bit different than Nat's slide, but it gives you some of the overarching themes. He validates my talk because this is the safety case approach is a more structured way to pull all of your evidence in, and there's three aspects to it. And as he noted, I'm showing just a small snippet of something that is pretty robust once you get into it. So,
Hey, Jackie, sorry to interrupt.
yeah.
There's a gray box on top of your slides. I don't know if you can see it.
I can only see the gray box that says your name on it. So should I do that?
It just got out of the way there. Yes.
Okay.
It's yeah. I don't know what it is, but it was just covering up visual, and I wanted to make sure everyone could see.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure if that was my visual.
It goes on
Okay.
every slide. So
Okay. Can you see everything now?
yes, thank you.
Okay. Great. Thank you for correcting me there. So safety case components, again, this is just small segments of it, but it is based on your claim, your argument, and your evidence. And so your claim, this is just a hypothetical, your overarching goal, that the AV will not hit a pedestrian. Your argument would be AV will detect pedestrians of all types and will avoid collisions. And then the third aspect is the evidence. And I think this is key to a lot of it. Again, showing the evidence. Here's the data on the ability to predict pedestrian behavior. And so these is just gives you a nice sample of what these are. And I should also note that safety cases are used in other industries. They're used in rail, they're used in nuclear, and obviously still used in this particular industry. And I want to acknowledge and give a shout out to Nat again, because the ATG team, where he was previously, put out their safety case framework as a way to communicate safety and truly build transparency. Again, these are just segments of them. They are robust documents, but I really do commend them because, again, communicating safety, not only externally, but what we found with a lot of our customers is internal communications is really key. So for example, if you have a design team, if you have your testing team and your safety team, when you're all aligned on your goals and your claims and you're building towards those milestones, the safety case framework pulls it all together internally. And again, as Nat had mentioned, when we're looking at all these standards, right? And he put out a chart of a bunch of standards. The companies need a way to put all of these pieces together. And the safety case approach is a very thoughtful way of doing that. I will say that we were very fortunate at EdgeCase to work with ATG's team on pulling together their framework to conform to UL 4600, which I will shift over to right now. Again, this is a standard that was published in April of 2020. And it's a standard for the evaluation of autonomous vehicles. Phil Coatman, our co-founder, was the lead technical author for this particular standard. And I also do need to acknowledge that I want to say that PennDOT was one of the forcing functions behind this. Back in 2018, Secretary Richards acknowledged the importance of collaboration, called out Underwriters Laboratory in her talk. And then soon after, the partnership with EdgeCase and Underwriters Laboratory, the standards body side of it, started to talk through what a standard would look like. And so we took the safety case approach. And it's, again, a standard to how to assess safety, what goes into the safety case, the properties of well-formed safety case. And as this technology is evolving, and as Nat had acknowledged, that everybody's building their cars a little bit differently. So this is tech neutral, and that they can define what safe means for them. I also, again, want to acknowledge that 4600 was a fantastic industry effort. We had, again, Nat and Maureen from the insurance side, which is really important, really engaged in it. USDOT, I want to acknowledge the work that Finch Fulton did of being a great contributor, Locomation, Argo, so a lot of great Pennsylvania, and PennDOT, of course, a lot of great Pennsylvania companies were engaged in this effort. And I want to acknowledge that version 2 is going to be coming out in Q2 of this year. We welcome other stakeholders to be a part of it. That gives you access to the standard. You can ping me, or you can also ping Heather Scalario at ul.org. This is an open process for this particular standard. And if you haven't had enough of 4600, get ready. There's 4600-2 for the evaluation of autonomous trucks. Again, taking a safety case approach. What we found is that during the writing process, that there was a need to have a standard that addresses certain aspects of just autonomous trucking. So the stakeholders will start to regroup here at the end of the month. We appreciate, again, the efforts of SAE and Maureen and Nat and his team at Aurora being on these particular industry groups as well. So if you're interested, get in now because we're just starting. Again, Heather, or feel free to ping me afterwards. Okay, now to kind of start summing it up and answer that one of those first questions that Parker had posed, how does it help people? How does it, so in this case, I'm going to say, well, how does it help? How do safety cases help AV companies, and how do they help insurers? At the end of the day, again, it helps companies argue the system is acceptably safe for deployment. It gives them a way to communicate this, again, internally, externally. They're able to monitor and validate this as a live safety case and also measure their metrics. A lot of parts of the safety case goes into safety performance indicator metrics. I didn't go into a lot of details. If you want to have more information on metrics and how they support into a safety case, you can come to our website on our resources page. Phil and Mike have plenty of talks on SPIs, or you can ping me afterwards as well. And then from an insurance perspective, as I mentioned, we work with insurance companies as well. And as Maureen had acknowledged, just how do you figure out how to price and underwrite the policies going forward? This is where a safety case can have a very meaningful role. When you're looking at the engineering process, you're able to see the standards being used and best practices. And once data is available, how do you track those metrics as well? So, so this ties it all together. And so I guess I want to close out with a testimonial. Is that, another thing that Parker likes to put on my desk or other notes, and this is his testimonial to say safety cases are so good for people. And I will say that, the technology that we were building right now, right today, will be impacting people like my son. He will be a future user of this. And to not only say, trust us, get in the car, press a button and go, there needs to be an argument to show that you are truly safe. So, so I figured I would close with that. But lastly, actually, one more thing, at EdgeCase, we do consider ourselves very strong, devoted safety advocates. Because of our expertise, we have a social responsibility to contribute to the conversation. So we sit on a number of different standards panels, not only on UL and SAE and IEEE and ASAM. There were so many standards that Nat had put up there that we actually contribute to on our from our team. And also, we put out podcasts that talk about metrics. So if you're interested in learning more about self-driving car metrics, you can go to our podcast page. And then lastly, most recently, we put a blog out called The User's Guide to Vehicle Automation. And what we felt that it's starting to be more responsible. We can identify who is responsible, right? Is it the car or the vehicle? So we highly encourage you to go to our website, check this out. And also, if you want, you can get a t-shirt that has the graphic on it, or a mug. We do have a store, because if you can't put it on a t-shirt, it's too complicated. So if there's any questions that folks may have for me, feel free to send me an email afterwards and follow us on our social media. We post our thought leadership pieces on a regular basis. And I will say thank you to BENDOT and all of the efforts that you've been doing for many years, and for all of the panelists. And we thank you for delivering the promise of autonomy safely.
All right. Thank you much. Thank you very much, Jackie. Appreciate it. Very insightful presentation. We are now going to go into the Q&A section of our presentation. We're right on time. If I could have all of the panelists turn on your cameras and unmute yourselves, we will go ahead with some individual questions and some potential questions for the whole group. We've been collecting questions from the chat, and then also thanks to many of the participants in the webinar that submitted questions along with their registration. We have those as well. So why don't I start off with you, Jackie, since you just finished up. And, you know, since EdgeCase is working with, you know, a lot of different folks in the industry, from the tier ones and governments and advocacy groups, you know, et cetera, what do you see the opportunity in building trust within the AV industry in general? And, you know, does that come up in the work that you guys are doing with these organizations?
Oh, no doubt. That is the big question. You know, and in building trust right now, there's a lot of uncertainty in the industry. And what we have found is that these assessments really need to have a solid foundation. And so we have an approach that we refer to as positive trust balance, that we feel that that there's a good foundation for this. And it has 4 pillars to it. It's building it right, which is talking about, are you doing good engineering rigor? Improving it right, acknowledging the field feedback that Nat has, you know, noted as well in his talk, of always taking those the information and streaming it back and learning from that, testing it right. What are you doing for closed course testing and simulation and comparing to on-road testing? Really focus on the testing side of things. And then lastly, living it right. This goes to the safety culture that, again, Nat had mentioned, and the importance of having a good safety culture and having incentives to be safe. For an employee to be afraid of raising their hand and saying, I see something unsafe because they're worried about their job is not a great safety culture. So what we really try to acknowledge is that safety culture of having more transparency, having separate committees, having more engagement is one of those pillars as well. So again, we call that positive trust balance. Those are our 4 pillars of building trust to stakeholders to show that you are safe.
Great, thank you, Jackie. And yeah, Amy, just looking at what SAE is doing to prepare for, you know, a lot of the safety validation in the industry. I know you touched on some of this in your, you know, in your presentation, but also, you know, in kind of response to the, you know, the question that came up in the Q&A, you know, attachment of, you know, how does this help the reassurance to people outside the you know, the tight group within the industry?
Sure. I think one of the things that I mentioned, and I'll emphasize, is that these types of engagements, engaging with everyone in the industry, there's so much going on and it's hard to keep up with everything. But I really like Jackie's presentation with the notes from her son, because I have 10-year-old twins at home that have asked me the same thing. They've said, you know, I'm not getting in a car without a steering wheel, you know? And so I think we have to remember that we talk a lot as industry, we talk in technical terms, we all live and breathe this day in and day out. But at the end of the day, you know, it's the consumers that are going to be adopting this technology, so convincing them, like, how are we helping people? How is it safe? And one of the ways that we do that, both in ABSC and through, you know, taking our best practices into consensus standards organizations, is by, you know, communicating what the companies are doing, what the individual subject matter experts are doing, that this isn't a problem that is, easily solved, that it is very difficult, and that we're going through the rigor and we're taking the right steps and working together doing it. So I think just emphasizing those points and making sure we keep talking that way so that the general public can understand what's going on behind the scenes and speaking about it in a way that they can understand, I think is really important.
Thank you. Yes, and I think forums like this are helpful to just start getting that message out to the broader audience, because we're often, focused within our own communities. So thank you. Maureen, there's a question about how much insurance for the liability coverage, the surety bond, self-insurance is recommended to, again, ensure public trust of the ADS. A lot of these, again, are around the themes, not just of the underwriting you're doing, but getting to that level of public trust.
Right. So thank you for that. You can all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Unfortunately, there is no crystal ball for that. And so I'm going to answer it a little sideways, I think. The first thing that you need to be focused on is, what can you afford to lose in your company? How much risk are you willing not to insure? Because that is the question you need to ask yourselves. The states will begin to put in line regulations and statutes around what the minimum limits are in order to operate autonomous vehicles on their roads. But if you have a serious enough crash, $5 million isn't going to cut it, especially if the person who is injured or killed is a young person with a bright future, and that was all taken away. I can guarantee you that the plaintiff's attorneys are going to try and get a, multi-million-dollar judgment in excess of 10 million plus. And if they had a family, or if they were disabled permanently, it's even going to be more. So the question is not, what do you need for trust? It's, what do you need to guarantee you will be in business after a serious crash involving a human, not necessarily just another vehicle? And what can you afford to purchase in order to stay in business? The trust itself will come from the minimum standards that are being set at the state level. You saw it in Florida, where the plaintiffs' attorneys argued with the state senators and the legislature about what were the limits that they needed, and they finally negotiated a limit. So trust itself will come by the backing of the insurance companies, by insuring, right, the AV companies, their ability to get insurance, but you need to look at it differently for your own longevity and safety. It's because if you don't have insurance, the defense comes out of your pocket. And a defense in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit can bankrupt a lot of companies. I hope I answered the question for you.
Yes, but I do have a follow-up question.
Sure.
Just from your perspective, with some of the level 2 automation that's already commercially available now in in vehicles that we can purchase, are you seeing claims affecting this as you're anticipating for level 4 and 5, or is it still related to or is it still kind of coming back to the drivers?
So unfortunately, for any degree of, I'll call it ADAS systems that are available in vehicles today, the insurance companies do not have a way to decode what ADAS system is in a vehicle based on the serial number, which is one of our key data points. And we don't know without asking. So the limitations we have are, we can't attribute an accident or a crash to the lack of an ADAS system failing. We don't know if the driver turned it off. Those things, it's the negligence of the driver, right? You know, unless they can prove that there was product defect, it goes back to the driver and then potentially the owner, because a policy today covers the driver and the owner. It's generally the same person, but it doesn't always have to be, right? So it's still basing the negligence on the driver / owner.
Great, thank you very much. It's very helpful perspective. Nat, there's one question was in the chat of has the AV industry drawn lessons from the 737 MAX situation in the world of aviation? And a couple other panelists brought this up. In other parts of industry using safety cases or this type of approach. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I can, and also wanted to maybe, I think, chime in just a little bit on that question that you started with, which is, I think there are actually two conversations going on at the same time around collaboration and transparency and trust. So there's the collaboration that's happening within the industry that, at least from my perspective, I think is at a robust level now. You probably couldn't say that 5 years ago. There's much more sharing of information amongst companies, as evident by we'll call it the plethora of standards coming out. But then what we failed to do is we think that if we do all of that and put it out there, that automatically consumers will understand it, or automatically the job that Maureen has to do makes more sense. And that's sort of what we've not done very well as an industry, is sort of how do we meet people where they are? Because it's not just about a bunch of standards. It's not just about whether states set some insurance limits or not. It's really about, do the consumers actually understand what it is, this thing that we're doing, and is it actually safe? And we need to do much better there. And I think part of the challenge is that we don't have kind of a uniform framework across the United States. So you have different states doing different things. Some states it's not even allowed yet, like here in Pennsylvania, to go truly driverless. So these are things that we have to work through, and it's actually tied to the trust thing, because if there's no level playing field, let's say, and different states have different experiences, that will speak directly to how consumers trust this technology. And tying that to the 737 issue, it's really important that companies always go back and look and see what has happened in the past. And so what we've done, my safety team in particular, is actually took the benefit. We had a lot of people that actually, some of them came from Boeing, and we actually spent some time talking about that issue well before Congress had issued its report. And I think some of the things that we took away from it are how processes can sometimes be brittle if you're not checking in on them. This is why our SMS system is a really big component of how we're going to engineer ourselves to be safe. There's also a big component there of a safety culture, where someone made a decision. That decision wasn't, let's say, necessarily propagated up or well known throughout the organization about the impact that it could have. And it manifested itself, kind of in a very deadly way. There are actually not enough forums for industry to talk about these sort of things amongst themselves. And it's something that I've been talking with some of my fellow heads of safety and some of the other companies to figure out what kind of forum can we have where we actually get together and talk about some of these safety lessons from other industries and how we can apply them to self-driving. So are there lessons learned in there? For sure. Can we do a better job understanding them? Always.
Thank you, Nat. Yeah, there was a general question on, so this summit, as Jackie said, has been going on for 4 years, and really looking at, we've had the PennDOT and the Turnpike and even the Department of Community and Economic Development as a, partner in this. And with that perspective, and I'm going to open this up to all the panelists, what can the state be doing to help advance safety and safety validation in this whole effort? I'll let anyone, since you're already unmuted, if you'd like to go, Nat, if you'd like to start. If not, we can go on to some others.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll kind of go where I started with, which is what our mission is, which is safely, quickly, broadly. I think we understand the tremendous weight of what we're trying to do as a company. and that we have to do this safely. That's why it's first in our mission. But quickly is also right there, right? We can't spend the next 20 years figuring out kind of a regulatory regime and all this other kind of stuff. I mean, I used to joke with my team, one of the reasons why I left government was so I didn't actually have to come up with those rules. But you know, here we are trying to figure it out. And so I think some of the things that would be helpful, obviously, is a path for letting this technology flourish in ways that we don't even yet quite understand or even can't imagine. I think forums like this are helpful, but I think it was Jackie who talked about, you know, essentially it's a very tight-knit community talking to itself. We need to figure out a way to translate this into something that is more digestible to the public. And I think that's something that states definitely can serve a role in, that is helping bring the citizens along. Companies have a role in that, but it's something that we should all be working towards together. So those are just two thoughts for me.
Thank you, Nat. Jackie, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yes, you know, actually, Stan, I to the first presentation that I did in State College, because the big theme that I presented was about engagement. And I do feel that one of the things that Pennsylvania does lack is a little bit more engagement from the governor's office. If you take a look at other states across the country, there's an innovation roadmap, and self-driving car industry is included in that roadmap. I think that I would highly recommend the governor's office engage more with PennDOT on how to build that out with economic development and what that means from a, from job retention and building out this community and this ecosystem. How do we have the great talent here to build a supply chain? So I do feel that what Pennsylvania does need to do is, first off, PennDOT is doing a great job when it comes to the policies that they have at hand. I know that NTSB has acknowledged Pennsylvania as having a really a robust safety policy. So I want to give Mark Kopko and Roger Cohen and the team kudos for that. But I do highly recommend, as I've said for the last 4 to 5 years, we need more engagement from the governor's office in order to really put Pennsylvania forward, for him to understand why this is important.
Thank you, Jackie. Amy or Maureen, any final comments?
So Amy, do you want to go or do you want me to go?
Go ahead, Maureen.
Okay. What I was going to say is, in other states, they actually work with some of the clients to do testing. For example, we had a client who wanted to run tests in Florida. And, the Department of Transportation in Florida was very cooperative with them and allowed them to do a run. They blocked the road. It was a highway. They blocked it off for X number of miles to allow the client to do the run, to begin to test the, autonomous vehicles on the roads coming on and off, the ramps. And I think it's really important, particularly because Pennsylvania has so many companies, in the Pittsburgh area who are focused on not only just, AV development, but platooning. And they don't have areas where they can go on the public roads and test, which is so critical. You have to see what's going on in your own state. And so we send them out of state to do their testing, which makes no sense.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, we've come to the end of our session. I'd like to thank the panelists for all your thoughtful answers and for the participants for all your great questions. As we end the webinar, you should be receiving Professional Development Hour certifications, PDHs from Chad Martin. So look out for them. And the next webinar will be held on Thursday, April 29th, and will cover the topic of work zones, which coincides with the National Work Zone Awareness Week, April 26th through 30th. This webinar will be moderated by Mahmoud Shahata, 2021 President of Maysite, and will include presentations from Basil Salim and April Wire from Maricopa County, Arizona's Smart Drive program, Vijay Varadarajan from HNTV, and others. More information and registration links will be sent out in the future. And as always, check the paavsummit.org website for all the updates. We have a great list of speakers and topics coming up in advance of the summit in October, and we hope to see you again at upcoming events. Kevin, can we adjourn?
Yep, we are good to adjourn. Thank you, everyone, for attending today.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you all
you.
very much.
Be
Bye,
safe.
you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.